Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into the classic journey of Summer Smith from Rick and Morty, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical, seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right? Lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. In the soft stillness of a familiar home on a familiar street, there lived a girl who never quite felt like the center of anyone's universe. Her name was Summer Smith. She didn't crash through walls with gadgets. She didn't make reality fold into itself with quantum brilliance. And she certainly didn't get handed the keys to adventure on a silver portal gun. No. Summer was the one left behind. The one at the window. The one watching. And yet, in that space, just outside the spotlight, she bloomed. At first glance, Summer's life looked ordinary, painfully so. She lived in a modest house in the suburbs, shared a hallway with her little brother Morty, and tried her best to navigate the unpredictable rhythm of high school. Her days were marked by whispered gossip, eye rolls in the lunchroom, and an endless scroll of texts that made her feel more connected and more alone all at once. But the real noise in Summer's life didn't come from school. It came from inside her home. The house never truly slept, not with Rick Sanchez around. He was the unpredictable storm cloud in her sky, brilliant, brash, and constantly leaving behind ripples of chaos that never fully faded. One moment, he was in the garage muttering equations to himself. The next, he was dragging Morty through a portal with nothing more than a burp and a shout. And always, Summer was left staring at the space where they'd once been. Just air now, still, empty, quiet. She pretended not to care. She'd joke about it, shrug it off. She'd go back to scrolling through her phone or texting someone who wouldn't text back. But there was a moment, always a moment, where she felt it, that sting, that subtle ache behind her ribs, that question. Why not me? She wasn't jealous of Morty, not exactly. But she saw it. The way Rick, for all his flaws, chose Morty. Took him, trusted him. Dragged him through star systems and collapsing timelines like he mattered. And Summer, well, Summer just watched from the couch. She'd laugh along when Morty came back with his hair fried or his eyes wide with terror. She'd ask sarcastic questions or roll her eyes at the goo still dripping off his backpack. But inside, she wondered what it would feel like to matter in that way, to be chosen, to be more than just the girl in the background. And still, Summer waited. She waited in her bedroom late at night, lit by a single lamp and the soft glow of her phone screen. She waited on family car rides, tuning out her parents' arguments. She waited while Rick stumbled in and out of the garage, rarely glancing her way. She wasn't waiting for rescue. She wasn't a damsel in distress. She just wanted in. She wanted to know what it felt like to have her story begin instead of always watching someone else's unfold. And in that quiet waiting, Summer began to grow. Not just taller, though. She did stretch out, gaining height faster than Morty, and enjoying the small victory of looking down on her little brother. But inwardly, too, she sharpened. Her sarcasm became a shield. Her confidence became a tool. And behind every joke, every eye roll, every sassy comeback, was a girl paying very, very close attention. She noticed things that others didn't. How Rick paused ever so slightly when he passed their family photos. How Morty came back quieter after certain trips. How her mom, Beth, sometimes looked at the stars a little too long before going inside. Summer carried all of it. She might have felt like the background character, but in her own private way, she was already beginning her own quiet transformation. Not with lasers, not with spaceships, but with awareness, with intent. The universe didn't invite her in. But Summer was learning how to knock. It wasn't long before the knock became louder. Not in a literal sense. She didn't bang down Rick's door and demand to be taken on a mission. No, Summer's way was subtler, more precise. She started showing up, first in little ways, sitting in the garage when Rick was tinkering, pretending not to be interested, asking Morty where he went, even if he answered with half-truths, leaving the door to her room slightly open, just in case anyone wanted to talk. At first, no one did. But eventually, the universe noticed her, or maybe Rick did. It started with a trip he hadn't meant to include her on a sudden emergency, a portal misfire, something chaotic that dropped Summer right in the middle of it. She wasn't prepared, she wasn't trained, but she didn't run. She stood her ground. And for the first time, Rick really looked at her. And just like that, the door cracked open. That moment didn't turn her into a hero. It didn't flip a switch or rewrite who she was, but it changed her trajectory. From that point on, Summer wasn't just waiting, she was stepping in. But in this early part of her story, the part we're still dreaming through now, Summer hadn't quite gotten there yet. She was still the girl sitting in her room with her headphones in, one leg bouncing, staring at the ceiling, while the sound of a laser rifle echoed faintly through the vents. She didn't understand everything that was happening in the world around her. She didn't know what Rick was running from or what Morty was enduring on their trips. She just knew that every time they left, it was like the house exhaled. And when they came back, the air shifted. Something was different. She began to sense that life wasn't as solid as it seemed, that her family's reality bent and folded in ways no one talked about. She'd hear words she didn't understand, Cronenberg, council, interdimensional, and she'd pretend not to care. But she wrote them down, thought about them, wondered what they meant, and what they meant for her. Because Summer Smith didn't want to stay small forever. She wasn't content being left behind while others fought monsters or discovered alien civilizations. She might have joked about prom or popularity, but deep down, there was a restless energy building inside her, like a quiet star waiting to burn. Even her dreams were changing. In the silence of the night, when the house finally grew still, Summer would imagine herself stepping through a portal, not following anyone, not tagging along, but leading. She dreamed of other planets, of strange skies, of places that didn't ask her to explain herself. She dreamed of a world where she wasn't in the background, but at the center. And yet, when morning came, everything returned to normal. The same breakfast table, the same awkward silences, the same parents pretending everything was fine. Summer wore her usual armor sarcasm, quick wit, an eye roll loaded with emotional distance. But behind that, her heart was wide open. She was ready. Ready to be seen. Ready to be heard. Ready to be included. And though she wouldn't admit it to anyone, not even to herself, she still wanted Rick's approval. Not the way Morty seemed to crave it, like a lost puppy waiting for scraps. Summer wanted respect. Recognition. A sign that she belonged in the places no one thought she could survive. And beneath all that ambition was a quieter, softer truth. She just didn't want to be forgotten. In a world where timelines collapsed, planets exploded, and clones replaced the originals, Summer feared the one thing no sci-fi device could fix, being overlooked, being the one no one remembered to bring along. But she carried that fear like a lantern, and in time, that quiet glow would light her path. Even here at the beginning of her story, Summer Smith was already becoming someone more, someone different, someone strong. She just needed a reason, A door. A single moment to say, "I'm coming too." And when that moment finally arrived, she didn't hesitate. It happened, as so many things in her life did, without warning. One moment she was just Summer lying on her bed, thumbing through her phone, listening to music she didn't even like, and the next, Rick was shouting from the garage, his voice louder than usual, hurried. "Morty! We got a situation!" "Wait, damn it! Where's that kid?" Summer didn't move at first. She assumed it was the usual drill. Rick needed Morty, Morty would go, and she would stay. But this time Morty wasn't there. And Rick, for once, actually noticed her. "You," he said, pointing directly at her through the open garage door, his goggles slipping down his nose. "You're coming with me. Don't ask questions. Just grab those boots and follow." There was no explanation. No time for hesitation. And Summer, she didn't hesitate. That first trip was a blur. An accidental emergency on a mining moon. A swarm of small metallic creatures that moved like fire ants, but bit like a razor wire. Rick had clearly hoped to fix things in under a minute, but nothing ever went as planned. Summer found herself ducking behind crates, sprinting through flashing corridors, and barking back when Rick told her to stay down. And though she was terrified, she wasn't helpless. Something inside her clicked. She noticed patterns in the creature's movement. She figured out how to disable the security locks without being told. She moved quickly, precisely. She didn't scream, didn't freeze, didn't run blindly. When they finally escaped, battered and blinking in the light of a distant red sun, Rick turned to her with a grunt. "Huh," he muttered, wiping blood his own or someone else's from his coat. "You're not useless." It wasn't a compliment. Not really. But for Summer, it was enough. Back home, no one even noticed she was gone. Beth was finishing a wine glass. Jerry was watching TV. Morty was asleep on the couch. And Summer. Summer was changed. That night, when she lay back in bed, she stared at the ceiling like always, but her eyes weren't empty. They were awake. Something new had settled into her chest. Not pride, not adrenaline, but purpose. For so long, she had watched the universe spin around her like a carousel she couldn't touch. Now she'd tasted it. And it wasn't as glamorous as she'd imagined. It was dangerous, unpredictable, exhausting. But it was real. And real was exactly what she wanted. From that night on, Summer started preparing quietly, in her own way. She read things Rick left open on the garage table. She studied alien symbols, memorized ship controls, and asked questions no one expected her to care about. She wasn't trying to prove herself to anyone. Not anymore. She was trying to be ready. Because Summer had learned the truth about her world. Everything was unstable. Time could fracture. Clones could replace you, and even your own memories could lie. The only thing she could control was herself. So she chose to be sharp, chose to be steady. And slowly, Summer stopped waiting for invitations. She began opening doors on her own. Sometimes that meant inserting herself into Rick's plan, sliding into the portal just before it closed, appearing at his side with a weapon in hand. Other times it meant standing up at school in moments where she might have once shrunk away, calling out cruelty, cutting through lies with a confidence no one expected from just Summer. She wasn't afraid of being underestimated anymore. She used it. And while Rick never gave her a warm welcome, he wasn't the type he stopped sending her home. He started counting on her in that subtle, unspoken way that meant more than words ever could. She still had moments of doubt. Of course she did. Nights where she'd sit on the roof, legs tucked to her chest, wondering if any of it really mattered, if she was just playing pretend in someone else's universe. But each time she reminded herself, she was there. She was part of it, and no one could take that from her. Not anymore. There were days when it all still felt surreal. Days when Summer would catch her reflection in the mirror, her own face, calm and familiar, and struggle to match it with the girl who had just helped Rick outsmart a sentient AI hive or negotiate with a floating tribunal of time wizards. She wasn't sure when she had stopped being surprised by it all. But what surprised her more was how right it felt. Not glamorous, not heroic, just real. Didn't fix everything, of course. The house was still the same. Jerry still fumbled his way through fatherhood. Beth still had that faraway look in her eyes whenever Rick left the room. Morty was still tangled in emotions he didn't know how to name. And Rick was still Rick. There were moments when he barely acknowledged her, times when he forgot her name mid-sentence or left her behind on a foreign moon without a second thought. But there were also moments, rare, quiet ones, where he tossed her a tool without explanation, knowing she'd know what to do. Moments when he trusted her. Summer didn't need trophies or titles. She didn't want to be the chosen one. She just wanted to feel seen. And now she was. Even when no one said it aloud. Even when she was still technically just the older sister. She had shifted something. Not the universe, not yet. But herself. She had carved space in a life that made no room for her. She had opened doors no one believed she could walk through. And most importantly, she had kept going. Because for all the madness she'd witnessed, all the galaxies and gods and glitches, in reality, what Summer held on to most was something much smaller and much more powerful. Persistence. She didn't give up, didn't shrink, didn't wait for someone else to make room. She simply kept being there, again and again, through the eye rolls, through the danger, through silence. She stayed, and in doing so, she changed the story. Not just Rick's as our Morty's, but her own. What began as a tale of being overlooked slowly became one of quiet, deliberate transformation. The girl who once stood at the edge of the portal was now stepping through it, not as a tag-along, not as a passenger, but as someone with her own reason to be there. Someone with her own voice, her own instincts, her own fire. Summer Smith didn't need the universe to revolve around her. She just needed a place to stand. And little by little, she found it. So now, as the stars pass overhead and the night deepens, we leave her for the moment not as the forgotten sibling or the background noise to someone else's adventure, but as a soul awake in the quiet, listening, learning, becoming. Because sometimes the strongest voices are the ones who waited and watched, and when no one believed in them, believed in themselves. And that was Summer's beginning. Summer Smith had always imagined that when she finally got to travel the universe, it would feel different. Louder, maybe. Bigger. Like stepping onto a stage with lights blinding and music swelling a moment that would announce, "I'm here now." A dramatic entrance, a shifting of fate. But when her second real trip with Rick happened, it didn't feel like that at all. It felt casual, almost disappointing. Rick tossed her a pair of gloves and mumbled something about corrosive spores. Then he opened a portal without fanfare and walked through like it was just another Tuesday. And Summer, still rubbing sleep from her eyes, followed. No spotlight, no parade, just spores, just Rick, just Summer. The planet they landed on was dull at first glance gray skies, swaying stalks of alien grass, and a low hum in the distance that never stopped. It vibrated through her ribs like a purring engine. And still, Rick offered no explanation. Harvest the orange ones. Don't touch the blue. Don't ask questions. Summer didn't ask. She just did the job. There was something grounding in that. She was learning to expect the unexpected, to focus on the task instead of the chaos around it. She'd seen enough from the sidelines to know that overthinking could get you killed, or worse, make you hesitate, which Rick hated more than anything. So she moved through the field, cutting with precision, loading spores into a container that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. She kept her head low, her steps light, and her instincts sharp. And then the ground moved. Not in the way most people would notice. Not a quake or a tremor, just a shift, like the planet had exhaled beneath her boots. She glanced at Rick, but he was scanning the horizon, muttering about isotopes and time dilution. He hadn't felt it. Or maybe he had and just didn't care. Summer, on the other hand, crouched slowly and pressed her palm against the soil. It was warm, not sun-warm, alive warm. There was something beneath the surface, something watching, breathing, listening. She didn't panic. She didn't even call out. Instead, she did something Rick never expected. She waited, listened back, and the planet whispered. Not in words, not in thoughts, but in a feeling, a deep, buzzing hum of approval, or maybe curiosity. It was impossible to explain. But in that moment, Summer felt something she hadn't felt since she was a child. Wonder. Not the kind you fake in school when someone brings a cool rock to science class. Not the Instagram-filtered kind you get from vacation pictures. Real wonder. Raw and strange and bigger than language. She stood up slowly, her hands still glowing faintly from the spores, and turned toward the center of the field where something ancient and luminous had begun to stir. Rick finally noticed. "What the hell are you, Summer? No. Don't engage with it." But it was too late. The stalks of alien grass bent inward as if bowing. The soil split gently, revealing a swirling pool of violet light that pulsed in rhythm with her breath. And Summer, instead of backing away, stepped closer. For once, Rick didn't bark. He didn't yank her back or fire a weapon. He just watched. The pool didn't suck her in. It didn't explode or teleport or trap her. It just opened. A window, maybe. A glimpse. And what she saw was not a vision or a memory, but a possibility, a version of herself alone in a vast field of stars, walking calmly towards something she couldn't name but somehow trusted completely. And then the light folded in on itself and the pool was gone. Summer blinked. The world was quiet again. Rick exhaled a long breath and muttered, "Huh." That was all. No lecture, no explanation, just huh? They finished the harvest in silence. Rick didn't ask what she saw. Summer didn't offer. But on the way back, as they stepped through the portal and into the fading light of the garage, Summer turned to him and said, "Next time, I want to pick the mission." Rick looked at her, one brow raised. "You think I care what you—" He stopped. His mouth twitched. Then he shrugged. "Fine. You pick." Just like that. Summer realized something in that moment. Respect in Rick's world didn't come with compliments or gold stars. It came with trust, with space, with the freedom to choose your own chaos. And Summer had just earned a little piece of that. That night she lay awake in her room, hands behind her head, the hum of the alien field still ringing gently in her chest. She didn't try to explain what she'd seen, not even to herself. She just let it echo. And somewhere, deep in that echo, was the start of something new. Not just adventure. Not just danger. But belonging. Summer didn't waste the chance. The next time Rick asked her if she wanted to come along half distracted, mid-burp. Typing something into his portal gun, she didn't hesitate. "No," she said. "You're coming with me this time." Rick blinked. The moment hung in the air. He tilted his head slightly, his mouth curling with a mix of amusement and skepticism. "You got a location in mind, Princess?" Summer nodded. She pulled a folded slip of paper from her pocket. Coordinates scrawled in careful lines, written from memory from one of Rick's maps, half buried in a junk pile near the garage workbench. A system neither Rick nor Morty had ever mentioned. Rick snatched the paper, gave it a glance, and scoffed. "You want to go there? That place is barely mapped. Nothing but gas clouds and abandoned relics." Summer only smiled. "Exactly." Rick watched her for another beat, then opened the portal. "All right. You lead." The universe on the other side was quiet, vast and pale, like a sleeping canvas stretched out between stars. No monsters, no traps, no Citadel agents or exploding eyeballs, just silence, and something beneath it. They drifted on a broken transport shuttle toward an ancient station suspended between two shattered moons. Summer sat in the pilot seat, her fingers light on the controls. Rick, for once, didn't hover. He watched, let her work, even passed her a data cable without a word. The station loomed like a memory, rusted arches, cracked domes, the remnants of something once majestic. Inside, time had slowed. Dust floated like snow in a forgotten cathedral. Machines blinked softly, still breathing in some small way. Summer moved with purpose. She'd read about this place old tech, experimental dimensional mirrors, a failed attempt to stabilize parallel timelines. She didn't want weapons or treasure. She just wanted to see it, to feel something untouched. Rick trailed behind her, boots echoing softly. You know, back in the day, this place was part of a bigger network. Think tanks, quantum dream loops, all kinds of crazy fringe science. He kicked a coil of wire. Now it's just ghosts. Summer knelt beside a cracked console. Her reflection stared back from a broken panel, fractured into 5 versions of herself, each just a little different. One smiling, one tired, one angry, one blank, and one looking straight through. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached forward and touched the glass. The console lit up. A faint hum filled the room, a slow, rising tone, like a choir warming its voice. The floor beneath them shifted, and for a moment everything felt weightless. Then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed them. Rick didn't curse, he didn't scream, he just sighed. Figures. Summer stayed still. Somewhere deep in that blackness something stirred. A voice, or maybe just a memory of one spoke without sound. "You are not the original." Summer's heart didn't race. She was used to the multiverse, used to the idea that she wasn't the only version of herself, but still, hearing it like this, spoken with such calm finality, hit somewhere deeper. She whispered back, "I don't need to be." A pause. Then warmth. The lights returned, not harsh, soft, golden. The mirrors before her now showed only one version of her. Not heroic, not glamorous, just present, solid, whole. Rick raised an eyebrow. "Huh? That's new." Summer stood. Guess it just needed someone who wasn't scared of themselves. He didn't respond. But his silence wasn't dismissive, it was thoughtful. As they left the station, drifting back toward their ship, Summer looked out the window at the quiet stars. There was something peaceful about this kind of journey, not the usual sprint from one crisis to another, but a slow wandering, a curious reaching. She wasn't chasing Rick's approval anymore. She wasn't even chasing adventure. She was just exploring. following the thread of her own wonder, her own instincts. For the first time in her life, she wasn't reacting to the universe. She was meeting it. Not with fear, not with jokes, but with open hands. After that trip, something subtle began to change, not just in Summer, but in the way others looked at her. Morty, for one, was confused, not jealous exactly, but wary. His role had always been clear. He was Rick's companion, the reluctant sidekick, the moral center in a world without breaks. And now, Summer was showing up more and more, not just tagging along, but actively shaping missions. She wasn't stealing the spotlight. She was redefining it. One afternoon, Morty caught her adjusting settings on Rick's portal gun carefully, methodically, like she knew what she was doing. You know that thing can, erase timelines if you screw up, right? He said, half joking, half nervous. Summer didn't look up. Then it's a good thing I don't screw up. Morty stared at her. She didn't sound smug, she sounded certain. And somehow, that was even more unsettling. He wanted to be happy for her. Really, he did. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching his own role shift, and he didn't know what to do with that. Rick didn't help. He didn't say anything outright, never did, but his behavior spoke volumes. When he reached for a second plasma rifle, he handed it to Summer without thinking. When he barked orders, he started including her name more often. And sometimes, when danger crept too close, he stepped in front of her first. Morty noticed it all. He started asking to stay home more, making up excuses, pretending his ankle was sore or that he had a test he forgot about. Rick barely reacted. Fine, whatever. Summer, you in? She was always in. But despite her growing presence, Summer didn't push Morty away. In fact, she tried gently, subtly to bring him along, to remind him they weren't rivals. They were family. She started inviting him to co-pilot, letting him decide where they landed on random missions. She'd nudge him during tense negotiations with alien traders and whisper, "You got this," even when he didn't believe it himself. Sometimes he responded, sometimes he didn't. But she kept trying. Because Summer understood something now that she hadn't before. Power wasn't about being the center. It was about sharing the space, expanding it so more voices could be heard. Still, there were moments when the loneliness crept in. When she looked around the ship and realized that no matter how far she'd come, she was still a teenager flying through galaxies with a grandfather who called her functional at best. There were no birthday cards, no deep emotional check-ins, just near-death escapes, cryptic nods, and the occasional grunt of acknowledgement. But Summer had learned to find comfort in small things, like the way Rick never overrode her coordinates anymore, or how he let her tweak his equations without snapping, or how once, when she passed out on a mission from dehydration, he carried her back to the ship not with a lecture, but with an unfamiliar gentleness. She never brought it up, neither did he. The bond between them was still jagged, built more on shared survival than softness. But it was real, and sometimes that was enough. There were also the places she'd started returning to on her own peaceful anomalies she'd discovered and claimed as her own. A quiet moon with pink trees that hummed when touched. A gravity-folded island that echoed every word in reverse. A cave system, filled with crystals that shimmered like breathing light. These became her sanctuaries, her spaces. Places where she didn't have to prove anything or perform or protect anyone. Places where she could simply be, not as Rick's assistant or Morty's sister, but just Summer. In those moments, she'd sit cross-legged on soft alien soil, stare up at unfamiliar stars, and wonder about other versions of herself out there. Were they confident too? Lost? Smiling? Failing? She didn't envy them anymore. For the first time in her life, she didn't want to be someone else. She was learning how to belong to herself, quietly, fully, even if no one applauded, even if the galaxy never noticed. The multiverse was infinite. And yet Summer was starting to realize she didn't need all of it to feel complete. She just needed pieces, a path of her own, moments that belonged only to her, and the quiet understanding that she didn't have to change the entire cosmos to prove she was worthy of being part of it. There was one world she returned to often now, not for any mission, not for any danger, just because it felt like hers. It didn't have a name, at least not one in any known language. Rick referred to it dismissively as Sector Nulltree, but Summer called it something else in her head, the place that waited. It was small, peaceful, a planet that shimmered in soft tones of silver and blue, covered in slow-moving fog and trees that bent gently toward anything warm. The sky didn't roar with storms or crack with energy. It just breathed like a sleeping dream. Summer didn't tell anyone about it. Not Morty, not Rick, not even Beth. She went there alone when the weight of everything got too loud, when she felt too big for her house and too small for the universe. Here in this space between chaos and silence, she would lie back on the cool moss and listen. The fog would settle around her like a blanket, and the trees would hum, soft and low, like lullabies in a language that didn't need words. She'd let her thoughts wander without direction, not solving problems, not chasing identity, just existing, just being. And in those moments, Summer Smith wasn't Rick's apprentice or Earth's sarcastic teen or the reluctant member of a fractured family. She was just someone who reached, someone who stepped forward when the door opened, who listened to the hum beneath the soil, who noticed. There was a deep, rare power in noticing. Not everyone did. Rick didn't. Morty tried, but often got pulled under by noise and fear. But Summer saw things. She remembered details. She read people. She noticed when Rick was quieter than usual, when Morty's eyes flicked toward the floor after a mission, when Beth poured one extra glass of wine, when Jerry tried too hard to be funny. Summer saw all of it, and while she couldn't fix it all, she carried it, gently, without fanfare. And perhaps that was why the universe seemed to bend slightly toward her now, as if it, too, had noticed her. There was a mission. Later that month, one Rick said would be low-level, almost boring, a simple supply run to a dimension made entirely of crystal life forms. He took Summer without hesitation. Midway through the trade negotiations, something went wrong. An ambassador misunderstood a metaphor. Weapons were drawn. Chaos erupted. Rick fired up a defense shield. Morty panicked. And Summer stepped forward. She didn't yell, didn't run, didn't threaten. She simply spoke. In the language she'd learned from old data logs, fractured transmissions, and a few long hours spent decoding vibrational syntax in her room. She spoke slowly, clearly, and the ambassador listened. The weapons lowered. Peace returned. Rick stared at her, mouth slightly open. "Okay," he said. That was actually impressive. Summer didn't gloat, she just smiled. Because that was the thing about growth, real growth. It didn't need validation. It didn't scream. It radiated. She wasn't trying to be impressive anymore. She was. After they returned home, Morty asked her how she learned the language. "I paid attention," she said softly. That night, Rick left a small device outside her bedroom door. No note, no explanation. It was an encrypted translator, twice as advanced as anything in the house. Summer didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. Rick didn't ask for one. Their bond wasn't built on words, after all. It was built on moments like that. Quiet, muted, real. So now, as the stars wheel silently through the sky and the fog settles again on the world that waits just for her, Summer closes her eyes. Not because she's tired, but because she knows, she trusts that she'll wake up still walking forward. Still curious, still strong, still reaching. Not for approval, not for power, but for herself. For her place in a story that no longer sees her as the background, but as someone who belongs in every chapter to come. Courage doesn't always look like charging into battle. Sometimes it's standing still when the world around you is falling apart. Summer Smith had been to planets where gravity bent sideways, where time unraveled in loops, and where entire civilizations lived in the mouths of sleeping giants. She'd faced creatures with teeth like crystal daggers, stared down rogue AI warlords, and watched her own reflection glitch in timelines she never remembered entering. And yet, none of that prepared her for what came next. It wasn't a monster or a black hole or even a betrayal. It was something far quieter, far closer. It started at home. One morning, she woke up to find the kitchen unusually quiet. No Rick slamming drawers, no Morty pouring cereal with his usual sleepy clumsiness. The clock blinked 7:12 a.m. The sunlight slid across the table in long golden ribbons. Beth sat at the table, unmoving. A cup of coffee steamed softly in her hand, but she wasn't drinking it. She was staring at nothing, eyes red, lips pressed tight. Summer froze in the doorway. She recognized that look. It was the look her mother wore only when something was deeply wrong, but still too raw to name. She stepped in slowly. "Mom?" Beth blinked, glanced at her, and then stood without a word. Left the coffee, left the room. Just like that. No explanation. No hug. Summer sat down in her place, stared at the fading steam, and her heart sank. Something had happened. Something Rick-related. Later that day, Morty confirmed that Rick had been arrested, or detained, or folded into a recursive, jurisdictional loop, as he described it. Some kind of interdimensional bureaucracy finally caught up with him. "He'll be out by Thursday," Morty added, trying to sound casual. "Probably." But Summer didn't share his confidence. She knew better than to underestimate bureaucrats with time-bending technology and no sense of humor. Rick was a problem they couldn't solve with blasters or bluffing. He didn't just break rules. He rewrote them mid-sentence. He made enemies everywhere he went, not because he was evil, but because he didn't care. And now, he was gone. That night, Summer sat on the roof of the house. The stars blinked like tired eyes overhead. She hugged her knees to her chest and stared at the empty patch of sky where Rick's ship would usually hum in the distance. She didn't cry, not because she didn't want to, but because the fear was sharper than sadness. She was scared. Not just for Rick, but for what his absence revealed. The house felt too quiet, too vulnerable. And that was when the knock came. Not on the front door, not even on this dimension. It was a signal embedded in the code of Rick's old portal logs, a distress ping, not from Rick himself, but from one of his fail-safes. A silent beacon he had planted in case Someone else came looking for the family. Summer accessed it through his garage terminal, fingers trembling just slightly. The screen flashed a warning. If you're reading this, he's gone, and they're coming. No names, no coordinates, no instructions, just that. It could have meant anything. Or anyone. But Summer understood. Rick had always assumed someone would try to exploit his absence. And now it was up to her. Not Morty, not Beth, and certainly not Jerry to hold the line. She didn't panic. She prepared. She activated the shields, calibrated the emergency locks, and programmed a containment grid into the basement using leftover materials Rick had once used to trap a sentient moon. She didn't ask for help. She didn't want a team. This wasn't about glory. It was about defense. It was about survival. She stayed up for nearly 40 hours straight, soldering circuits, reinforcing weak spots, reading every note Rick ever left, even the half-burned ones written in alien shorthand. And in the silence of that long night, Summer did what few ever expected of her. She became the protector, not the bystander, not the backup, not the sarcastic sister in the background, but the one who stood between her family and what was coming. It started with the lights, a flicker, a pulse. Then every bulb in the house went black at once. The hum of the containment grid whined into a high-frequency shriek, then dropped into silence. Summer didn't flinch. She was already in the garage, crouched near the core reactor, fingers poised over the manual override. The house sensors had picked up something, a breach, but not local. Dimensional. That meant they weren't dealing with aliens or mercenaries. They were dealing with travelers, the kind who didn't knock. The first figure emerged not from a portal, but from the walls, a slick shimmer like oil moving backward through glass. Then a shape formed tall, cloaked, face hidden behind a mask that split vertically when it moved. It didn't speak. It just watched her. Summer didn't speak either. She activated the speaker grid and transmitted a message across all nearby bands. This home is protected. You have 10 seconds to leave. The figure tilted its head, amused. Another shape followed, this one smaller, holding a device shaped like a tuning fork wrapped in moving runes. They stepped into the garage like they owned it, like the world inside was already theirs. Summer let them. She knew better than to strike first. She waited, watched, calculated. One of the figures reached for the wall terminal, and that's when she hit the switch. The floor plates lit up with a sudden surge, and the containment grid she'd spent 2 days assembling activated in a blast of blinding light. The invaders were caught in a mesh of phase-locked particles, trapped. They screamed not from pain, but fury. The kind of anger that comes from being outsmarted by someone you didn't think mattered. Summer stepped forward slowly, voice low. This is my house. My world. You don't belong here. One of them tried to phase out flickering, stretching, but the mesh held. Rick had taught her well. The grid was tuned to trace the atomic blueprint of dimensional trespassers. It didn't just trap their bodies, it trapped their possibilities. I'm going to give you a chance, she continued, calm as glass. You walk away now, and I pretend this was an accident. The smaller figure spat something in a language she didn't recognize, but she caught the tone. Summer raised the frequency on the grid. The containment field narrowed, glowing brighter. The taller figure began to shudder. And just before they disintegrated into their portal, a forced, desperate retreat, they looked at her again. That same tilt of the head. But this time, it held something new. Not fear, not respect. Recognition. They knew her now. When the house fell silent again, Summer lowered the grid, powered down the defenses, and slumped into the chair by the control board. Her hands were shaking. She only noticed it when she looked down and saw the tremble in her fingertips. But she didn't break. She didn't cry. She exhaled slowly, steadily, and said under her breath, "Not today." Later that evening, Beth noticed something different. The windows had been sealed, reinforced with an invisible weave that shimmered only under certain light. Jerry made a comment about the weird glow in the basement, but Summer waved it off. Morty asked what happened. "Just some traveler," she said simply. "I took care of it." Morty blinked. "Wait, like actual interdimensional threats?" Summer didn't answer. She just poured herself a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly aware of how heavy her limbs felt. It wasn't the kind of exhaustion that came from lack of sleep. It was the kind that came from carrying something no one else saw. A responsibility. A weight. The fire she'd stepped into and refused to be burned by. Rick returned 2 days later. No portal. No dramatic landing. Just the soft, familiar rumble of his ship gliding to a stop in the backyard. The garage door creaked open, and there he was, disheveled, singed coat, bruised knuckles, and that usual look of exhaustion worn like armor. Summer didn't rush to greet him. She was in the basement, recalibrating the field dampeners. Rick walked in slowly, pausing when he saw the mess of cables, conduits, and tech that hadn't existed when he left. He took it all in the modified frequency buffers, the reinforced shielding nodes, the shattered shell of a containment grid still smoking faintly in one corner. And then finally he looked at her. She didn't stop working. He cleared his throat. "So, did I miss something?" Summer tightened a coil. "Some travelers came, the ones from your failsafe signal." Rick raised an eyebrow. "They get in?" "They tried." A pause. He stepped closer, looking at one of the devices she'd rigged using spare pieces of a neural stasis unit and a toaster. His voice was low when he said it. "You handled it?" Summer didn't nod and didn't smile. She just looked up and said, "I had to." That was the thing. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't seeking approval. She wasn't waiting for him to say good job. She had done what needed to be done. And Rick for once understood that. He ran a hand through his hair, the grime on his fingers leaving faint streaks across his scalp. "That grid's not bad," he muttered. "Could have used some better insulation, but yeah, not bad." Coming from Rick, that was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Still, Summer didn't say thank you. Instead, she asked, "You okay?" Rick froze, caught off guard by the question. Of all the things she could have said, all the things she could have demanded, she chose that. He didn't answer right away. Just walked past her, sat down on the workbench, and let out a long, tired sigh. "They didn't even want me dead," he said finally. "They just wanted my absence. That's how bad it's gotten. I've made so many enemies, I'm more valuable out of the picture than in it." Summer leaned back against the wall. "You're not a weapon, Rick." He snorted. "Sure feels like it sometimes." They sat in silence after that, not uncomfortable, just quiet. The kind of quiet that forms when two people realize they've both been standing in different fires, alone, and now, finally, they're sharing the same light. After a while, Summer stood. "I'm going to reset the core before it runs hot again." Rick didn't argue, but as she walked away, he said something she didn't expect. "Thanks for holding it together." Summer stopped. Not from surprise, but because of how real it sounded. She looked over her shoulder. "You're welcome." And that was that. He didn't ask for a breakdown of her defense protocol, didn't try to retake control. In that moment, Rick Sanchez, the smartest man in the multiverse, accepted that his granddaughter had stood in the fire and didn't burn. That night, the family sat down for dinner. No one mentioned the incident. Not Beth, not Jerry. Morty scrolled on his phone, and the room filled with normalcy again. Laughter, dishes clinking, the hum of conversation. But Summer sat a little straighter. She didn't interrupt, didn't dominate. She just occupied space calmly, quietly. As someone who knew that when things truly went wrong, she would be the one who stayed. She didn't need to be thanked for it. She didn't even need to be noticed, because the fire had taught her something the stars never could. That real strength isn't about surviving chaos. It's about staying calm in its center, about protecting the people who don't even know they're in danger, about never letting fear be the loudest voice in the room. And Summer, once a girl, desperate to be seen, now understood the value of being steady even when no one was watching. The fire didn't leave marks on her skin. It didn't scar her hands or brand her shoulders. But it changed her, in ways even she couldn't quite describe. Summer began waking up differently after that week. Not earlier, not louder, just more aware. Her dreams weren't filled with explosions or adventure anymore. They were quiet. Still, often replaying moments from the past that hadn't seemed important at the time, helping Beth clean out the garage, or watching Morty laugh at something dumb on TV, or standing on the porch with Rick while a double-moon sunset faded without either of them speaking. She began noticing things again. Little things. How the humming of Rick's equipment changed pitch just slightly when it was about to fail. How Jerry's hands trembled slightly when he poured his coffee. How Morty's eyes always flicked toward the window when someone mentioned portals. It wasn't hyper-awareness. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. A steady sense of presence. She didn't need the universe to throw tests at her anymore. She didn't need to prove she was brave. She already knew. One afternoon, while helping Rick recalibrate a stabilizer node, he paused and said without looking at her, "You're not just useful anymore." Summer tilted her head. "What does that mean?" "It means," he muttered, tightening a bolt, "you're not here because I need help. You're here because you've got instincts, because you get it. Because if I go down, I know you'll get back up and finish the job." Summer didn't say anything. She didn't have to. They kept working in silence. Two minds, two hands, side by side. Not master and apprentice. Equal. Later that week, a new beacon appeared in Rick's galactic inbox. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a request. It was an invitation. A group of alternate Summers from different timelines, different realities had formed a collective. Not a rebellion, not a league, just a quiet network. They called themselves the Emberling. It wasn't a secret society. It was a message to each other and to the multiverse. We're not side characters anymore. Rick scoffed when he saw it. Cute. Like a book club, but with space knives. Summer smirked. "Maybe I'll go." He didn't stop her. She did go. Not because she needed to feel connected to her variants, but because she wanted to see them. To know how the fire had shaped them, too. They met on a quiet orbital ring above a dead star. No titles, no ego, just Summers. Some in armor, some in lab coats, some in flannel shirts and combat boots. One was part cybernetic. Another had glowing red eyes from an experiment gone wrong. But all of them, still her. When it came time to speak, Summer didn't give a speech. She simply shared what she had learned. That fire you feel, the one that scares you because it might burn everything down, that fire isn't there to destroy you. It's there to make sure you see what's worth protecting. It clears the noise. And what's left, that's who you really are. They didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They just nodded. Because they understood. Summer left that meeting quieter than when she'd arrived. Calmer, but not smaller. Stronger. She wasn't fighting to be noticed anymore. She was fighting to be anchored. To stay grounded even when everything else twisted and burned. To be the one others could rely on, not because she was invincible, but because she was steady, unshaken, unmoving when it mattered most. Back home, she sat on the porch again one evening, watching the same double-moon sunset Rick once stood beneath. The wind was soft. The world, for once, was quiet. Rick stepped out beside her, 2 mugs in hand. He handed her one. "You're different," he said. Not as a compliment, just an observation. Summer took the mug, sipped, and said, "Yeah, I know." They sat in silence for a long time. The stars came out. The fire, both literal and metaphorical, had come and gone. And Summer Smith was still here. Not burned, not broken, but forged. Even the strongest stars need orbits. Even the fiercest flames need something to keep them steady. And for Summer Smith, it was never just about power or adventure. It was about the people who tethered her to something real. She never said it aloud, not to Rick, not to Morty, not to anyone. But without them, without those quiet, complicated bonds, she might have spun off long ago. This is the story of those bonds. The ones that weren't always easy. The ones that weren't perfect. But the ones that kept her going. Let's begin with Beth. Summer's relationship with her mom was never simple. Beth was strong in her own way, clinical, composed, sharp. But she wore her pride like armor. Her softness came in rare glimpses, tucked between overfilled wine glasses and nights spent staring at her reflection in the microwave door. For most of her life, Summer felt like she was chasing Beth's attention. Not her love that was always there, deep and silent, but her recognition. Beth saw Morty as fragile. She saw Rick as a storm she couldn't control. But Summer? Summer was the one who handled things. And sometimes, because she was so capable, Beth forgot to ask if she was okay. One night, after a particularly rough mission that left half the house's tech fried and the garage smelling like ozone and fear, Beth found Summer curled up on the couch, still in her boots, eyes unfocused. Beth didn't ask what happened. She just sat down beside her. There were no words, no motherly advice, just a hand on Summer's back, firm, steady, and the kind of silence that said, "I know you're caring more than anyone sees." Summer didn't cry. Beth didn't push. But something in the air softened. From then on, their bond began to change, not in sweeping gestures, but in the small things. Beth started leaving tea on her nightstand when she worked late. She asked about her projects in the garage, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. Once, when Summer came home bruised and limping from a failed experiment, Beth wrapped her ankle and muttered, "Your grandpa's a damn lunatic. But you're solid." And that was enough. That was everything. Because when you're used to being the one who never asks for help, even the smallest kindness feels like gravity. Then there was Morty. Summer and Morty had always been close, but not in the way that shows up in perfect photographs or heartwarming holiday stories. Their bond was forged in sarcasm and shared trauma, in panic room arguments and whispered apologies. They fought like only siblings could, and forgave like only people who've seen the end of the world together could. When Rick vanished at one time for an entire month, it was Morty who knocked on Summer's door at 3 a.m. with 2 cups of hot chocolate and a bag of frozen waffles. They didn't talk about Rick. They just watched cartoons until the sun came up. Morty understood what it meant to be the sidekick. And Summer understood what it meant to break out of that role and what it cost. There was no jealousy between them anymore. Not really, just respect. A quiet understanding that they were in this mess together, even if their paths were starting to look a little different. They had each other's backs in ways that no one else ever could. And when things got bad, when the walls shook and the monsters closed in, it was never Rick who called out her name. It was Morty. Always Morty. Because underneath the bickering, beneath the layers of sarcasm and eye rolls, there was something unbreakable: trust. Summer and Rick were never the type to hug. They didn't say, "I love you." They didn't make space for soft moments with flowers or apologies. Their relationship was built differently. Built in the aftermath of explosions, in the cold silence after a mission gone wrong, in the quiet nods exchanged across lab benches and alien battlefields. But it was real. In its own weird, ragged way, it was one of the truest things in Summer's life. Rick never treated her like a child. Not the way he treated Morty sometimes. Not the way most adults did. With Summer, there was no filter, no protection. From the very beginning, he gave her the same chaos he gave the universe. And strangely, it was that chaos that helped her grow. There were moments rare and raw when she caught glimpses of something more in Rick's eyes. Not pride, exactly, but recognition. Like the time she reprogrammed his entire cloaking system in under an hour, using only a half-broken quantum motherboard and the battery from her old hair straightener. He didn't say anything. Just looked at her, nodded once. But she knew what it meant. And there was that one night, the one neither of them ever brought up, when they crash-landed on a frozen asteroid and were stuck there for 10 hours waiting for the emergency portal to charge. Summer had a cracked rib. Rick's portal gun was fried. They huddled together inside the ship's emergency hull, surrounded by static and ice. He was quiet for most of it. Then, without turning to look at her, he said, "You're better than I was at your age." Summer didn't reply, because she knew if she did, he might take it back. Rick wasn't good with emotion. He avoided it like antimatter. But in his own strange way, he gave it freely. Through actions, through presence, through the way he let her into his world without ever locking the door behind her. He taught her to see the cracks in the universe and how to walk through them without losing herself. He showed her the fire. But more importantly, he trusted her to survive it. That trust became a bond stronger than blood. Not because it was tender, but because it was honest. There were still arguments, of course, epic ones. Fights that rattled the garage and shook the walls. Screams over timelines, over ethics, over decisions that nearly cost them everything. But the next day, without fail, Rick would slide a new piece of tech onto her workstation. And Summer would install it, no apology needed. Their language was different, sharp, right down, unspoken. But it was love, not the soft, sitcom kind. Not the warm parent-child hug at the end of an episode. It was the kind of love that says, "I will not shield you from the storm, but I will teach you how to build a shelter." And for Summer, who had spent so much of her life feeling like a background character in other people's stories, that was enough. Because Rick saw her. Not as potential, not as a kid, but as a person. Capable, strong, unshakable. And that belief, spoken or not, was a bond that carried her farther than any spaceship ever could. Jerry Smith was many things. Clumsy, nervous, deeply unsure of himself. To the galaxy, he was a punchline, the guy who stumbled through crises. Always 2 steps behind and 1 mistake away from disaster. But to Summer, he was Dad. And that title meant something, even when it hurt, even when he failed. Their relationship had always walked a delicate line between affection and embarrassment. When she was younger, Summer used to hide in the back seat during school drop-offs so no one would see her dad's awful attempts at cool banter or his bizarre Spotify playlists. But over time, something shifted. Because while Jerry could be a mess, and often was, he was there. He didn't understand half the things happening around the house. Didn't grasp portals, tech, or timelines. But he still sat at the dinner table every night. Still asked about her day. Still tried. That trying mattered more than Summer ever let on. He wasn't Rick. He wasn't a genius. But he showed up. Consistently. And sometimes, that was enough. She remembered one night long after a mission gone wrong, when she returned home scraped, bruised, and completely drained. Everyone else was asleep or pretending to be. But Jerry was in the kitchen, pouring milk into a bowl of cereal. He looked up, startled. "Hey, kiddo, late night?" She just nodded and sat down beside him, not saying a word. Jerry didn't ask questions, didn't press. He slid the cereal bowl across the table toward her and poured a second. They ate in silence. The kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. And when she stood to leave, Jerry said something that caught her off guard. "You're stronger than I ever was." Summer didn't respond, but she paused long enough to let him know she'd heard it. Because here's the truth. Jerry might have been weak in the face of danger, but he was steady in ways that mattered. He loved his kids fiercely, even when they towered over him literally and metaphorically. He defended them, even when he didn't understand what they were becoming. And maybe, deep down, Summer knew that Rick's brilliance could save the world. But Jerry's warmth helped keep her world from falling apart. There was a trip, a rare one, where Rick couldn't come, and Morty was grounded. Summer was sent to pick up a component from a distant moon base, and Jerry insisted on going with her. She rolled her eyes, tried to talk him out of it, but he was determined. He brought sandwiches, labeled his tools with Sharpie, wore a ridiculously oversized space helmet that fogged up every 2 minutes. And it was, predictably, a disaster. He fell twice, triggered an alarm, mistook a stasis pod for a vending machine. But when the base's central AI glitched and Summer found herself locked in a zero-G chamber losing oxygen, it was Jerry who found the override panel. He didn't understand how to use it. Didn't even try to solve it logically. He just hit every button, yelled at the ceiling, and somehow got the chamber open. It was messy, clumsy, unscientific. But it worked. And when Summer coughed herself back to consciousness, Jerry was crouched beside her, panic in his eyes and tears in his voice. "Don't you ever scare me like that again." For once she didn't laugh at him, didn't roll her eyes. She just hugged him. Because love doesn't have to be brilliant to be powerful. And sometimes the people you underestimate most are the ones holding the rope when you fall. Jerry wasn't her hero. He didn't need to be. He was her dad. And in a universe full of monsters and madness, that meant more than he would ever realize. Summer often wondered what people would see if they looked at her from the outside. Not in the dramatic moments, not when she was saving the day or navigating interdimensional chaos, but in the quiet ones. The spaces between battles, between quips, between survival. Would they see a girl hardened by trauma? A sidekick struggling for relevance? A teen holding the weight of a world that didn't ask her permission? Maybe. But Summer knew better. She lived better. Because she wasn't just built from the pain and the panic. She was also built from people. From the way her mom sat silently beside her after the worst days. From the way Morty never let her go into a mission alone. From Rick's rare but grounding honesty. From Jerry's clumsy, unwavering love. It was those connections, raw and ragged as they sometimes were, that became her armor. Not the gadgets, not the training, not even the courage. It was them. The family that both broke her and built her. There were moments she hated them. Times when Beth's silence felt like betrayal. When Morty's fear left her stranded. When Rick's arrogance put them all at risk. When Jerry's helplessness grated like sandpaper against her rage. But love, real love, isn't flawless. It's messy, loud, incomplete. And Summer carried it all. Every awkward dinner, every wordless apology, every unexpected moment of warmth. One night, the power went out. No portals, no ships, no tech. Just a blackout. Earthbound and ordinary. Summer lit candles. Jerry tried and failed to make popcorn on the stove. Beth opened a bottle of wine. Morty dug out a dusty old board game. Rick didn't complain, just sat quietly in the corner, adjusting a broken piece of equipment by moonlight. They didn't talk about the blackout. They didn't talk about anything serious at all. They just played, laughed, lived. For that 1 hour, the universe outside could have collapsed, and no one would have noticed. Summer caught herself watching them, all of them. Not because she was suspicious, but because she felt thankful. It wasn't often that time stood still. But when it did, she realized what it had given her. Not just purpose, not just strength, but roots. People she could fall toward when everything else was falling away. And those bonds? They didn't demand anything from her. They didn't need her to be the smartest or the bravest, or the one who always had it together. They just needed her to be there, to sit at the table, to be a part of the story. And for Summer Smith, someone who had spent so long trying to prove she belonged, that was more than enough. Because love didn't need to look like a sci-fi epic. Sometimes it looked like candlelight and spilled popcorn and a broken board game. Sometimes it looked like home. Not perfect, but real. And that was the bond that kept her going, even when the stars shifted and the timelines bent. Even when her world felt like it was always one spark away from burning down. She had them. And they, in their messy, awkward, broken way, had her. Strength isn't always loud. It doesn't always scream in the face of danger or burst through walls with fire and fury. Sometimes it's quiet, invisible, a soft persistence that refuses to fall apart. And for Summer Smith, this hidden strength was the most powerful thing she ever carried. People always saw the brave version of her, the one who handled chaos, stood tall beside Rick, challenged the universe with sarcasm and confidence. But what they didn't see was what happened in the silence after. What they didn't see was the strength she never showed. It wasn't because she was hiding it. It was because that kind of strength lived in the places people rarely thought to look. Like the way she stayed awake after missions, not because she couldn't sleep, but because someone had to check the boundary sensors, Rick never asked her to, no one did. But she knew what it felt like to think the danger was over, only for something worse to show up later. So she watched, and waited, and told no one. That was strength. Or the way she would sit in the living room when Jerry and Beth fought, never interrupting, never inserting herself, but always staying close in case Morty needed her. She never pretended to have all the answers. She just made sure no one felt alone in the confusion. And that, too, was strength. Her resilience didn't come from invincibility. It came from endurance. There was a moment not long after a botched rescue mission when Summer found herself stranded on a half-destroyed space station orbiting a dead planet. No food, low oxygen. She had 27 minutes of breathable air. No working portal gun. No ship. No Rick. And no one coming. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. She sat down, closed her eyes, and started rerouting power to the emergency beacon, not because she knew it would work, but because doing something was better than doing nothing. She didn't cry. Not until after she was safe. Rick showed up 10 minutes before the oxygen ran out. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. But when she stepped back onto solid ground, knees weak and heart pounding, she went to her room, closed the door, and let the tears come silent and short, like a pressure valve easing off. And in the morning, she got up, brushed her hair, and went back to work. That, too, was strength. No one saw the way her hands shook after some battles. No one noticed how she paused before entering certain rooms, not out of fear, but out of memory. She didn't ask for comfort. Didn't ask for praise. She simply carried on. And sometimes the weight of that was heavier than any gun or backpack or interdimensional tool. There was another kind of strength she held, the kind that kept her from saying the things that would have been easy to say but hard to take back. Like the time Rick told her she was almost as useful as Morty, while drunk and slouched over his tools. She could have snapped, could have yelled, could have torn him down with words sharper than any weapon. But she didn't. She looked at him, saw the way his hand trembled holding the wrench, saw the tiredness in his eyes. And instead of rage, she offered something much harder, restraint, because she knew what pain disguised as arrogance looked like. She knew how hard it was to love someone who never made it easy. So she stayed silent, finished the repairs, and left the room. That moment, that restraint, strength. It was compassion with teeth. It was control without coldness. It was hers. There were times when Summer wanted to scream, not because something hurt, but because it didn't. Because she was starting to get used to the danger, to the silence that followed, to the sense that maybe she wasn't just surviving it, maybe she was becoming it. And that thought terrified her more than any monster. But she didn't scream. She didn't break the plates in the sink. Didn't storm off into the night like some dramatic coming-of-age movie. She just stayed. In her room, in her body, in her reality. And that, too, was a kind of fight. One no one ever gave her a medal for. One no one even knew she was fighting. There was a morning midwinter, pale light flooding the kitchen when Rick, hungover and groggy, knocked over her breakfast by mistake. Pancakes gone, orange juice everywhere, syrup in the blueprints she'd left on the counter. He didn't apologize, just grumbled something and kept walking. Summer stared at the mess, the sticky, ruined meal, the soaked pages she'd spent hours drawing up. And for one brief moment, her fingers twitched. She could have thrown the glass, could have screamed, could have followed him and said everything she'd been bottling up since the last time he'd let her down. But instead, she picked up the juice carton, wiped the counter, peeled the soggy paper from the surface, and started again. Because Summer knew that strength wasn't just about explosions or witty comebacks. It was about starting again, every day. No matter how much of yesterday was ruined. She'd never say it aloud, but sometimes she worried that being the strong one meant she'd never be allowed to fall apart. That if she cried, it would disappoint people. If she admitted she was tired, no one would believe her. If she showed weakness, it would crack the foundation she'd built for everyone else to stand on. So she kept her mask on, her armor quiet, her pain subtle. Not because she was pretending, but because she was protecting everyone, even herself. There was a mission once, light years from Earth, something small that turned big fast. A diplomatic retrieval turned civil war, and suddenly the family was trapped in a palace siege surrounded by armed insectoids. Rick was wounded. Morty had a concussion. Beth was pinned. Jerry was somewhere. And Summer? She was holding the line. Laser in one hand, makeshift shield in the other, dodging fire, calculating escape paths, buying time. No one saw her do it. No one could. But when they got back alive, shaken, sore Rick patted her shoulder and said, "Thanks for not dying." That was it. No ceremony. No retelling of her bravery. And she was fine with that. Because it wasn't about being seen. It was about being there. Every time. Another moment came weeks later. Morty came into her room looking distant, tired. "I keep thinking about that planet," he said, a voice low. "The one with the broken time loops. The kids who didn't make it." Summer didn't say, "It's okay." Didn't lie. Didn't offer distractions. She just slid over, gave him space to sit beside her, and let the silence stretch. He leaned his head on her shoulder. She rested hers on his. And that moment, that quiet space where pain didn't need to be explained, that was strength. Because it's one thing to fight off monsters. It's another to sit with grief. To hold someone else's heartbreak without turning away. Summer did that. Over and over again. And no one ever called it bravery. But it was. It always was. Some choices leave a scar. Not the kind that bleeds, but the kind that stays quiet under the skin, etched deep into who you are. Summer made more of those choices than most people her age ever should. And the world didn't thank her for them. No one clapped. No one even noticed. But that's how you know they were the right ones. There was a day when the citadel of Ricks, fractured and unstable, sent out a call, not for help but for compromise. A faction of neutral Ricks wanted Summer on their team. Not Morty, not Beth. Her. Because she had become known. Quietly. Reluctantly. Her name had reached the shadows of the multiverse. The granddaughter who stood when others fell. The one who didn't flinch. The one who adapted. They didn't want her because she was special. They wanted her because she was steady. She would have had power, authority, a place where she didn't have to fight to be heard. But she said no. Not because she didn't want it, but because she knew what it meant. "You want me to become you," she told the representative. "And I'm not done being me yet." That refusal cost her more than she let on. Rick didn't comment. Beth raised an eyebrow. Jerry congratulated her in that awkward, overly sincere way he did everything. But none of them understood how close she'd come to saying yes, how tired she was of being in the background, how tempting it was to take a seat at the table finally and let someone else carry the burden. But Summer had learned something powerful about herself. Her strength wasn't just in what she could lift. It was in what she could walk away from. Another choice came not long after, subtle, personal, and quietly heartbreaking. There was someone who made her laugh, someone who didn't flinch around her family's chaos, someone who saw her, not as a Smith, not as Rick's granddaughter, just Summer. And for a while, that felt like everything. But then came the fork in the road, as it always does. The choice: stay with someone who made her feel soft and safe, or step back into the ever-turning madness of the world she'd helped build, where comfort was rare and safety was never guaranteed. She didn't explain, didn't cause a scene. She just left a note that said, "You deserve peace. I'm still learning how to carry fire." It tore something open in her, because that relationship had been one of the only places she didn't have to be strong, and she gave it up to remain strong for everyone else. That decision left no burn mark, no portal trace, just an ache that visited her in the quiet, and still she never told anyone, because this was the kind of strength no one wrote stories about, the kind that said, "I will protect you, even if it means being lonely." She'd always been brave in battle. But this giving up of ease, this choosing of the harder road, that was bravery without spectacle. There was another time, a smaller one, when Rick built a device that could predict every possible decision she'd make in a given week. He showed her the data. "You've got potential," he said. "In 3 universes you lead. In 2 you save Earth. In 1 you outlived me." She stared at the screen, then turned it off, because she didn't want the roadmap. She didn't want the script. Didn't want the prediction. She wanted to keep walking forward, even if it meant not knowing where the path ended. That, too, was a kind of strength. The kind that says, "I don't need to know I'll win. I just need to keep going." And Summer did. Again, and again, and again. Some people shine like star. Some roar like thunder. But Summer Smith, she endured like stone. Not cold, not unfeeling, but constant. Present, unshakable. She didn't rise above the chaos. She stood right in the middle of it, and refused to be moved. The funny thing about being strong in silence is people forget to ask if you're okay. They assume you are, because you're not crying, because you're still showing up, because you still know how to load the laser cannon while making sarcastic jokes about intergalactic fascists. But Summer did feel things. Deeply. She just didn't show it the way others did. She loved her family fiercely, even when they drove her mad, even when they fell short. She worried about the future, about the damage Rick might cause, about the ways Morty was changing, about the emptiness in Beth's eyes some nights, about Jerry's quiet sadness, the one he covered with sitcom-level optimism. And still, she never made it about herself, never stood in the center of the room and demanded attention. Instead, she listened. She noticed. She was the one who remembered Rick's anti-toxin shots when he was too drunk to care. The one who caught Morty's muttered nightmares when everyone else was asleep. The one who convinced Beth to skip work just once to have pancakes and talk about absolutely nothing. The one who turned Jerry's broken remote project into a functioning drone, just so he could feel like he made something. She didn't do it for praise. She didn't do it for love. She did it because she could, and because no one else would. That was her strength. The strength to carry pain without becoming bitter, to carry responsibility without needing a spotlight, to carry others gently, quietly, even when no one carried her. And it wasn't thankless. Not really. Because sometimes the universe did thank her. In its own strange way. Like when Rick handed her a project without explaining it, not because he was lazy, but because he trusted she'd figure it out. Or when Morty deferred to her mid-crisis without question, because he'd stopped seeing her as the older sister and started seeing her as a leader. Or when Beth, in a rare moment of softness, whispered, "You remind me of who I used to be," before handing Summer her old scalpel polished and clean. Or even Jerry, who once muttered, "You're the glue, you know," while trying and failing to set the dinner table. And Summer? She held all of it, like little tokens in her back pocket. Not to prove anything, but to remind herself when the quiet got too loud that she mattered. Not for her power. Not for her intelligence. Not even for her courage. But for her presence. For her unwavering heart. For the strength she didn't show because she didn't need to. Because it was already inside her. Unseen. Unshaken. Unspoken. And it held everyone together, even when everything else fell apart. There's something powerful about the act of walking. Not running, not leaping, not escaping. Just walking. One foot in front of the other. Through silence. Through fire. Through everything that tried to hold you back. Summer Smith was never the fastest. Never the strongest. Never the chosen one. But she was the girl who kept walking. Through wormholes and wastelands. Through arguments and heartbreak. Through the broken pieces of the people she loved. And somehow she never stopped. That's how her story ends. Not with a war. Not with a triumphant speech. But with a girl still walking, still choosing forward. It started with small steps. Literal ones. After one of Rick's more disastrous missions, a black hole collision, in a shattered galaxy the family barely made it home, they limped back through the portal, clothes singed, hands shaking. Summer had a fractured arm. Beth had a burn across her shoulder. Morty wasn't talking. Jerry had thrown up in the corner. Rick just disappeared into the garage without a word. Summer didn't follow him. Didn't check the damage readouts. Didn't even change her clothes. She went outside and walked. It was 3 a.m. The neighborhood was still. She walked past the houses she'd grown up around. Past the swing set where she used to push Morty before either of them understood what they'd grow up to face. Past the gas station, the flickering lights and dusty vending machines. Her arm throbbed. Her boots were scorched. But she kept walking. Not to get somewhere. Not to run from something. Just to feel the earth under her feet. That walk became something sacred. A ritual. Every time the world cracked open, she walked it back together. And as the years passed, that walk took her farther than she ever thought she'd go. There was a time when she stood at the edge of a cliff on planet Grontok beneath twin moons, breathing in air thick with minerals and old wars. She had just saved a colony from collapse, and no one remembered her name. Rick was hailed as the genius. Morty got hugged by children. Beth and Jerry were awarded honorary medals. Summer? She stood near the back, hands in her pockets. A soft smile on her face. Later that night, she left the camp and walked through the glowing fields alone. The plants shimmered blue and hummed when touched. She didn't need the applause, didn't even resent that it never came, because in that moment, with starlight brushing her skin and silence surrounding her like a blanket, she felt enough. That was the secret. She didn't walk to be seen. She walked to remember, to feel the gravity of her own journey. And what a journey it had been. From the girl who once begged to be part of Rick's wild adventures, to the woman who now carried entire missions on her back, to the human who chose to remain human, even when the universe offered her more. She never wanted to be a god, never wanted to conquer or destroy. She wanted to understand, to survive, to love even if it hurt. And she did, over and over again. She loved Rick fiercely, frustratingly, even when he forgot her birthday, even when he gambled with her life like it was a piece on a board. She loved Morty stubbornly, protectively, even when he resented her strength or lashed out in fear. She loved Beth silently, loyally, even when the roles between mother and daughter blurred beyond recognition. She loved Jerry awkwardly, sweetly, even when the rest of the galaxy called him useless. And more than any of that, Summer learned to love herself. Not the myth people whispered about. Not the girl with the attitude or the laser pistol. But the part of her that kept walking tired, sore, uncertain, because standing still was never an option. Because growth demanded motion. And healing didn't always look like victory. It looked like walking away from someone you still cared about. It looked like walking back into danger because you couldn't let someone else fall. It looked like walking through fear without letting it define you. There was one final mission, not long before Rick began fading in and out of reality more frequently. He'd built something dangerous, a device he claimed would fix everything. But Summer knew better. She saw the tremble in his fingers, the way he couldn't look her in the eye. "This thing's got a cost," he muttered, "but maybe it's worth it." Summer didn't yell, didn't argue. She simply walked over, took the device from his hands, and said, "If it costs you, it's not worth anything." Then she crushed it under her boot. Rick didn't speak for days, not out of anger, but because he knew she was right. That moment, that was the end of something, and the beginning of something else. Summer had always followed Rick, shadowed his genius, echoed his defiance. But now, he followed her, and she walked forward into something new. The older she got, the less she fought to prove herself. Not because she stopped caring, but because she finally understood that being seen and being true weren't the same thing. There was peace in that realization. A soft kind of peace. The kind that didn't come from winning battles or surviving another apocalyptic timeline, but from knowing who she was without anyone else's permission. Summer began to turn down certain missions, not because she couldn't handle them, but because she was choosing to let the galaxy spin without her for a while. She found comfort in stillness, in quiet projects, in grounding rituals that reminded her she wasn't just a soldier of fate. She tended plants, built a mini greenhouse in the corner of Rick's old lab, each one labeled not by species but by memory. Alt Earth 72 saved the kid, homeworld of the singing coral, planet where Morty learned to listen. Sometimes she'd sit beside them for hours, watering, pruning, humming to herself. These moments were hers. No explosions, no lasers, no trauma hiding around the bend. Just air and growth and space to be someone gentle. Because Summer had been tough for so long, but now she was learning that tenderness could be just as strong, and that maybe it was even harder. She reconnected with Beth in a strange, circular way. Their bond had always been tangled mother and daughter, balancing between resentment and reflection. But time softened them. Beth started asking questions instead of assuming answers. Summer began trusting her mom to hold parts of her story, even the vulnerable ones. They'd sit on the porch, wine and tea in mismatched mugs, and talk. Not always about big things. Sometimes it was just about the weather on other planets, or which dimension had the best sunsets. But every now and then the conversations grew real. "I never knew how strong you were," Beth once said, her voice quiet. Summer didn't respond immediately. She just smiled, looked up at the stars, and replied, "I didn't either. Not until I had to be." Morty, too, had grown. He'd seen so much. Too much. There were pieces of him Summer would never fully reach again, parts altered by the weight of their shared path. But still they had each other. Their bond was no longer about bickering or competition. It was about quiet recognition, shared looks across tense rooms, unspoken understanding. When Rick started vanishing for longer stretches, not in space but within himself, it was Morty and Summer who handled things. Together. Steady. Present. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night and find Morty downstairs, thumbing through old mission logs, trying to piece together what made Rick, Rick. Summer never stopped him. She just sat beside him, offered a blanket, made tea, and listened. There was one moment during a particularly quiet evening when Morty looked at her and said, "Do you think we'll ever be normal?" Summer had smiled, sad and warm. "No, but I think we'll be okay." And that was enough, because okay was underrated. So was stable. So was boring. Summer had chased excitement long enough to know it never filled the void. What filled it were things like shared silences. The feeling of her mom brushing her shoulder as she passed. The sound of Morty's laugh during a dumb sitcom. The clink of Jerry trying and failing to fix the toaster again. It wasn't grand, but it was real. And in that reality, Summer found the last piece of strength she'd never known she was missing. Peace. It came softly. Like the way sleep arrives when you're not chasing it. Like the way dusk settles on the horizon, not with fireworks, but with grace. And through it all, she kept walking. Not as a hero, not as a symbol, just as Summer. The girl who had seen too much, felt too much, lost too much, and still chose to keep going. Not toward a final answer, not toward redemption, but toward whatever came next. Legacy isn't always loud. It doesn't always look like a statue or a holiday or a name etched into a ship's hull. Sometimes legacy is found in the whisper of a decision, in the ripple of kindness you didn't expect, in the strength someone else discovers, because of you. That was Summer's legacy. Not as a warrior, not as a revolutionary, but as a presence. A steady hum in the background of people's lives. One that held them up without asking for attention. It showed up in Morty first. He never called it that. Never said, "I'm doing what Summer would have done." But it was there. The way he paused before reacting. The way he let others speak before filling the silence. The way he sometimes just stood still, choosing not to fight, not to run, but to simply stay. He started to remind others of her. The tech crews from old missions. Refugees from the collapsed Sarnik system. Even Rick, on the rare occasions he let down his defenses. She used to do that, he muttered once, watching Morty patch up a collapsed alien miner without being asked. Do what? Give a damn. Rick never explained further. He didn't have to. Because Summer's legacy wasn't in what she taught people. It was in what they absorbed from being near her. She never sat anyone down to give life lessons. She lived them. And people learned. There was a school rebuilt on a shattered asteroid colony that had a classroom called the Summer Room. Not because she built it, not because she saved it, but because one day a little girl told her, "When I grow up, I want to be strong like you. Not loud strong, just like how you don't quit." Summer had smiled, ruffled her hair, and helped lay bricks for the school's first wall, then left before the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Years later, her name still echoed in the corridors. Elsewhere, a group of survivors on an unstable time loop planet created a survival guide called Keep Walking. They didn't know her full name. They didn't need to. They remembered the woman with the calm eyes who showed them how to dig a trench, how to collect rainwater, how to breathe when the loop reset again and again. She never panicked, one of them wrote. She just moved, like forward was the only option. That was Summer. Not a legend, not a god, not a savior, but compass. Pointing quietly to hope when maps fell apart. Even Rick, in his own fractured, stubborn way, acknowledged her legacy. He never said it to her face. But Morty found something once in the garage. An old frame with a photo of Summer sitting alone on the roof, knees hugged to her chest, looking at the stars. Scrawled on the bottom in Rick's handwriting. She did it right. Better than me. He had kept it hidden, because some truths are too raw for daylight. But it was there preserved, silent, reverent. The universe, with all its chaos and entropy, rarely paused to honor the steady souls. But those who felt Summer's quiet orbit never forgot it. Her strength didn't echo through battles. It echoed through balance, through the way she held others without breaking, through the way she kept her footing when everything shifted, through the way she stood, not in front of others, but beside them. And that was legacy, not in what you build, but in what remains upright after you've passed through. Even Jerry, years later, once sat beside an old bot and whispered, "She was my best friend. Don't tell anyone." They'd never believe me. But Jerry knew. He had always known. And Beth? She began writing again, something she hadn't done since childhood. Short, simple essays, observations, memories. One of them, tucked into a drawer where no one could find it, was titled, "My daughter is the strongest person I know." Summer never read it. Maybe that wasn't the point. Because her life, her choices, were never about recognition. They were about continuance. The act of going on. Quietly. Consistently. Lovingly. The last walk was different. Not because it was dramatic, and not because something exploded or unraveled behind her, but because for the first time in a long time, there was no emergency. No war to stop. No friend to rescue. No Rick in danger. Just Summer. On a quiet world. In the middle of a warm dusk. The planet had no name, or if it did, she never learned it. There were soft hills, flowers that glowed blue at the edges, and a sky that changed color with the wind. She had come here on her own. Not to run, not to hide. Just to breathe. She didn't bring weapons. Didn't need armor. She brought a journal, and a scarf Morty gave her years ago. She walked for a while. Let the air fill her lungs. Let the silence wrap around her like a friend. Eventually, She found a place near the edge of a crystal-clear lake and sat down. Not to write history. Not to plan her next move. Just to be. She wrote in her journal, "I don't know what happens next. Maybe I'll stay here for a while. Maybe I'll find another place to help. Maybe I'll go home. I don't feel lost. I just feel still. And maybe stillness is a kind of motion too." As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, colors swirling across the sky like spilled watercolor, Summer laid back on the grass. She thought of Rick wherever he was now. She thought of Morty, maybe reading comic books or trying to fix the toaster. She thought of Beth and Jerry dancing clumsily in the kitchen. She thought of herself not as a part of something, but as her own whole. She didn't need to be remembered. Didn't need songs or legends. The people who mattered remembered her already. And the rest? Well, she'd passed through their stories gently. That was enough. As sleep crept in soft and slow, Summer smiled. Because in all the places she'd been, in all the battles she'd survived, in all the ways the universe had twisted around her, she never stopped walking. And she never walked alone. Not really. Because every step she took carried echoes of those who shaped her, of those she protected, of those who, in quiet gratitude, kept walking too. She was never the girl who sought the crown. She was the girl who built the path, stone by stone, step by step, for others to follow when the stars felt too far away. And in that final moment, wrapped in silence and peace, the universe gave her one last gift. Stillness. Not as an ending, but as a rest. Because even the strongest walkers deserve a place to sit. And with that, dear sleepyheads, we reach the end of Summer Smith's journey, not in fire, not in fury, but in quiet resolve. From the girl in the background to the girl who kept walking. We hope this gentle story helped you relax, reflect, and drift toward rest. If you're still awake, tell us, what was your favorite summer moment? And where in the world are you listening from tonight? If you're already asleep, that's perfectly fine too. This story will be here for you anytime you need to walk beside her again. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and remember, you are stronger than you know, just like Summer.